If you are a Sega Saturn fan, you know this logo well. Lobotomy Software are rock stars among your kind. When the Saturn launched, the first-person shooting genre was in its infancy. There had been a handful of solid releases, but for the most part we were seeing developers just starting out on how to make this genre something special. We of course had Wolfenstein and Doom, two games that had some decent representation on consoles already. But in June of 1996, Quake was released to stellar reviews. The fully 3D engine could do things Doom never dreamed of, and even the enemies and weapons were made of polygons. It took a pretty beefy PC to run it as well, so of course most people assumed that home machines like the Saturn and PlayStation didn't have any hope of doing it justice. Lobotomy Software had created POWERSLAVE, however, a game that used the much talked about slave driver engine. It allowed a fairly complex 3D environment with colored lighting that looked and played pretty nice against similar games at the time, particularly on the Saturn. When it was announced that Lobotomy Software was going to do not only a port of Duke Nukem 3D but also Quake, Saturn owners the world over rejoiced. If any group could do the source material proud, it was Lobotomy Software. In this episode, we will take a look at Quake for the Sega Saturn, compare it to the PC original, and see just how close the slave driver engine came to replicating it. Quake was very similar to Doom in how it was set up. Basically, you were set loose in maze-style levels to find weapons and keys on your way to the exit. There were many enemies along the way, secrets hidden all over the place, and traps to rob you of your patience and sanity. When you began Quake, you chose your difficulty right in the game. Once you go through the teleporter, you have a choice of 4 different episodes. Episode 1 is Dimension of the Doomed. Episode 2, The Realm of Black Magic. Episode 3, The Netherworld, and Episode 4, The Elder World. Within each is a rune you must collect so you can access the final level. Each episode has a secret stage that can be found as well. Weapons are mostly analogs to the stuff you saw in Doom. There is a shotgun, a double-barreled shotgun, a nail gun which is just a machine gun, a grenade launcher, missile launcher, and a lightning gun. Ammo and health are strewn all over the map for you to collect, as are items like quad damage, which greatly increases your damage potential. Unlike Doom, you can jump in Quake, which leads to many instances of platforming. You also can now look up and down, which adds an entirely new twist to the gameplay. If an enemy is above you, you can look up to get a better shot on him instead of relying on the auto aim. You can also check out what's below you so you can avoid blind drops. Gone is the need to flip switches in this one, and instead you simply activate most by walking into them. There are a few switches that need to be shot, but these are usually clearly marked. Combat is much more dynamic and difficult in Quake when compared to the games before it. Enemies are more aggressive and do a ton of damage with weapons like grenades and lightning. You'll be seeing the loading screen a lot in this one, particularly in the later levels where the AI is as nasty as any first-person shooter I've ever seen. The Saturn came out a year and a half before Quake was released, meaning that its technology was well behind what you needed to make the game run well on a PC. Lobotomy Software tackled this by not using the original Quake engine, and instead ported its assets to its own slave driver engine. The results are better than you'd expect, and worse than you had hoped. Level geometry is pared back, but still fairly accurate overall. Textures are darker and less detailed, but again, still looks similar enough to be recognizable. Enemies are made of lower polygon counts but animate the same. Health and ammo crates are still polygons here, but your on-screen weapon has been made 2D as opposed to the PC original. Performance is smooth in tight areas, but choppy in the bigger, more open sections. Since Slave Driver was capable of colored lighting, there is a ton of it here that wasn't in the original PC release. Explosions, muzzle flash, and stage lights can all be various colors, and when you go underwater, there is a really nice effect of light shimmering all around the environment. Overall, the end result is an impressive showing for aged console hardware doing a cutting-edge PC game. There are some rough edges, of course, particularly when you get some close-ups of the enemy textures and polygon counts, or the frame rate tanks in a complex room. But if you have ever seen the original DOS version of Quake running on a PC of that time, the Saturn edition here is pretty damn faithful. Despite a general feeling of being choppy, being overly dark, and the lower polygon enemies and architecture, Quake's biggest issues on the Saturn boils down to what made the PC version so great: its multiplayer. There is no deathmatch or co-op here of any kind. A big part of the experience of these kinds of games was always its multiplayer features, and since Duke Nukem had the option on Saturn to go either head-to-head or play the story co-op, its complete absence in Quake is kind of a bummer. Of smaller note, the 3D environments were also harder to deal with without a mouse or a dual analog solution. It did support the 3D control pad, which does help, especially if you use the alternative control scheme that makes the face buttons act as a second analog stick, but it's still tough to aim accurately while under duress, especially if you are in an area where things have gotten really choppy. Of course, much like Doom, the many modern variants of Quake make these older versions pretty much just relics to satisfy your curiosity. I can't help but to feel a sense of amusement in Sega's supposedly weak 3D console pulling this off. Doubly so when you consider the circumstances. Lobotomy Software had overextended itself big time in taking on ports of both Duke Nukem 3D and Quake. Lobotomy was a small developer and did both these games concurrently. Like Quake, Duke Nukem 3D did not run on the same engine as the PC version on which it's based. Lobotomy had to again move the original assets to its slave driver engine. That means it was taking two of the biggest first-person shooting games on the market, redoing them in their engine, and all at the same time. It spat both games out at the end of 1997 before Christmas, a deadline that no doubt took its toll. You have to wonder, had this talented group not been under the same kind of pressure, just how much better this game could have been. The legacy of Lobotomy Software with Saturn fans is a tale of talent burning bright and hot, but ultimately not lasting very long. They did the excellent POWERSLAVE, which was essentially a first-person 3D Metroid well before Nintendo did it, the impressive Duke Nukem 3D with all its crazy attitude, enemies, and weapons, and finally the game the Saturn wasn't meant to be capable of at all, Quake, with its completely 3D environments and characters. Lobotomy Software was hurting so badly for money after this project, they sought a buyout by Crave Entertainment the following year, resulting in the company being broken up and shut down shortly thereafter. We would see no sequel to POWERSLAVE, a damn shame no matter how you look at it. What we did get was a lasting legacy of proof that the Saturn could do impressive 3D if the developer had some skill to utilize the architecture efficiently. There was simply no equal to POWERSLAVE in 1996 on consoles. Duke Nukem 3D was more impressive on the Saturn than it was on the PlayStation, and who in their right minds would have ever thought you could have pulled off Quake in any playable form, much less one that actually had that lighting engine behind it. It has made all three of Lobotomy's games must-owns for the Saturn platform to many of us. We don't just fondly remember them as the versions we played first, but also respect the hard work and dedication that made them all possible. I'm Sega Lord X. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.